everyone, and welcome to the PMO Virtual Summit. Today, we have a very special guest all the way from Phoenix, Joe Pusz. Joe, how are you?
I'm doing great today. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate this.
My pleasure, and it's great to have you here. We're going to be talking about using the PMO approach to build or improve your PMO. Once you have the opportunity to build a PMO, when you've strived hard to get that role, you settled in, and now it's time to really, roll up the sleeves and get into the grind. And this approach that Joe is going to tell us about is really going to help you along the way. But before I hand it over to Joe, I do want to go ahead and tell you all a bit about Joe and what he does. So Joe Pusz is the founder and CEO of the PMO Squad, a project management consulting firm serving clients across the United States. The PMO Squad provides services to address client needs with project management best practices, training, program delivery, software, and resources across multiple industries, including aerospace and defense, automotive, aviation, digital, e-commerce, healthcare, retail, and more. PMO Joe, as he is often known as, is also the host of the Project Management Office Hours radio show broadcast across the globe on the Phoenix Business Radio X network. He is a PMI member, mentor, and project management advocate. The PMO Squad also sponsors the Veterans Project Management Mentoring Program with partners Vets to PM and Veterans to Work. The program pairs veterans seeking to transition into civilian project management careers with experienced project managers who volunteer time as mentors. Everyone, that's Joe for you. Joe, over to you now.
Great, thank you, Hussein. As you mentioned, the topic today is going to be using the PMO approach to build or improve your PMO. And before we get into the topic, just to expand a little bit on that great introduction that Hussein just provided, touch a little bit more on this to say, as an advocate, really we use the Project Management Office Hours radio show and podcast platform to bring on guests that we talk about best practices within project management and Agile or other disciplines that are related to project management. And of course, as we mentioned, the Veterans Mentoring Program. Along with volunteering with PMI, the PMO Squad also sponsors events locally here in Phoenix. We also have presented at local chapter meetings. I'm also a member of the SIM Arizona board, where I'm the director of sponsorships, and all of that comes with 20+ years project management experience. But we don't just do this at the PMO Squad for capitalism, right? It's not all about the dollar. For me, project management can make such an influence in our society, and we do that with our saying project management with a purpose. So on our radio show recently, we had Kenneth Steinus, who's the CEO of Sensei Project Solutions, and he actually surprised us by making a $5,000 donation to the Veterans Project Management Mentoring Program through 10 e-learning courses that they are providing to veterans within the program. So I just want to share with everybody that you too can make a difference by helping to support our veterans as they transition into careers in project management. And if you would like to be a partner within our program, please reach out to us today and we'll gladly help you get set up. But now let's dig into the content. The first thing is we're very fortunate in the project management space to have PMI, and every year they do the Pulse of the Profession report. And within that report, they get fantastic data for us through their research that helps us with our clients to understand the state of the industry and where we're headed. Also where we're performing well and where we could improve. So a lot of what you're going to see in the presentation today is rooted in the research that came out of PMI and the Pulse of the Profession that we've seen over the past decade or so. Within the 2018 PMI Pulse of the Profession, you'll notice these three key stats or metrics that they had. And oftentimes when we get into a new client, we'll talk about project management, and the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, you're creating a way to standardize how we do projects. And yes, we can see the results of that, right? 93% say that there's widespread use of standardized practices. But if that's all that we as PMO owners are, then we're missing the mark. And we can contrast that where we have on the other end of the spectrum here, 58% of organizations fully understand the value of project management. So why are they using standardized practices across 93% when only 58% understand the value? And therein lies the root of the problem on where many of our PMOs struggle today to really capture and take root within the organization and deliver the expected value that organizations want to see. Now, we had good fortune here in Arizona, the Phoenix chapter of PMI. Recently, James Snyder, one of the original founders of PMI, came on and did a speak for us at one of our dinner meetings. It's the 40th anniversary of the Arizona chapter. And in the early years of PMI, they didn't have all of this defined, right? There wasn't a PMBOK. There wasn't standard practices. It was an organization trying to take common views and bring them together. And out of that, with a lot of hard work, PMI was formed, of course. Well, James Snyder gave us a great walk down history lane and memory lane, talking about that exercise. And also sharing with us that PMI as a whole is only around 50 years old, right? Next year will be our 50th anniversary. So as a profession, project management hasn't yet matured. Certainly, project management's been around for a long time, right? We all know that when the pyramids were built way back when, of course, some form of project management was being used. But it wasn't formalized yet, right? There wasn't a profession, there wasn't a discipline. So that discipline and profession is fairly new. And what's the first thing that comes on board with a new profession? It's the standardized practices. It's the standardized processes. So the 93% here makes sense. But as project management matures, if we're going to sustain relevance as a profession, we need to shift away from just being standard practices and move into a direction of value. How are we providing value? Here's another key stat that is in every PMI Pulse of the Profession going back to 2011 and probably beyond. What do you see when you look at this chart? I know what I see. I see no progress. It's interesting to me that each year we publish these results, but we don't see an improvement. So whether we're meeting goals within budget, on time, we're flat. It's essentially a decade of no progress in any of these areas, yet PMI as a whole has grown exponentially in members, in the amount of programs that they put out, the amount of certifications they put out. And why is that? I think one of the keys is, again, as a young profession, we haven't found the ways to actually go implement project management properly into an organization. And without organizational buy-in, we don't have an opportunity to make improvement. So even though we're getting more people certified, more members, organizations are performing a little bit better, we're essentially flat. And I think what we're going to talk about as we move through the presentation today is how we can change that, how we can come off of this flat representation of project performance into an organizational role and capability that the PMO can provide to actually get us moving in the right direction. So how do I know that's possible? Well, first of all, PMI shows us it's possible, right? Each of the presentations that we've had from PMI, or rather the Pulse of the Professions from PMI over the past few years, has talked about the champions versus the underperformers. And there is a huge disparity between the two. Champions are far more successful. You can see the graph here with this. But they're only 7% of the organizations that have been surveyed in the Pulse of the Profession data. So we know there are some organizations that can really excel at this. However, we know it's a small group. What I want to talk to today are those 80% that are in the middle. They're not underperformers. They're not champions. They're you and I out there every day trying to run and manage our PMO, and we have some wins, we have some losses, but we're flat. We're never making progress. We're not quite meeting expectations. And that's what our talk is about today, that middle 80%, trying to shift them in the direction of becoming a champion. So what are some of the common solutions that you and I have been faced with as we try to solve our project management problems? Now, keep in mind, I'm not just founder and CEO of the PMO squad. Before that, I ran PMOs in Fortune 500 companies, regional healthcare companies, and other. So I've sat in the chair of a PMO leader, and I know what it's like to have the top brass beating on you because you're not quite delivering what you need to do. And through those experiences, what did we find? Well, of course, the first thing we need better PPM software. I'm not getting enough data. I'm not getting the right data. I can't have technology keep up with me like the sales team does or the marketing team does because I'm on an antiquated system. So we go get approval. We put a new system in. And what do we find out? Same results. It's not a software problem. Project management can be enhanced or improved if software is used the right way. But if you have an issue within your organization, software alone isn't going to solve the problem. What's step number two? We look at our staff. Do we have the right mix of project managers? Is our talent level where it needs to be? Perhaps, here's the best one I love, the project managers on staff today were brought on by the prior PMO director, so they don't fit well with me. Sorry, doesn't work. Must be the process. Perhaps we didn't have a defined methodology previously. Perhaps we're not agile and we need to move in an agile direction. Or maybe we are agile and we've gone too far agile and we need to go back to waterfall. We try to come up and share with our leaders that the reason that we're not being successful is because of the processes that we're using. Don't buy that one either. Doesn't work. Been there, done it, tried it, failed. Well, then it must be because we're not auditing enough. We don't have enough governance in place. We've built a process with good project managers using the best software available, but they're not adhering to it. Maybe we need to be more rigid in our auditing process to ensure they're following exactly the way we want them to. Nope, that doesn't work either. Well, there's only one thing left. It must be the director. It must be the manager. The person leading the PMO must go. If we bring in a new PMO manager, we're going to find that we can be more successful. Nope. Sorry, doesn't work either. Been in far too many engagements where they have turnover at the top level of the PMO and it doesn't do anything. Let me draw a little bit of a sports analogy for you. I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and I'm going to compare them to the Cleveland Browns. Over the past 49 years, the Pittsburgh Steelers have had a total of 3 head coaches. By contrast, the Cleveland Browns have had 18 head coaches. Now, in pro football, the ultimate prize is to win the Super Bowl. How many of the Pittsburgh Steelers won over the past 49 years with only 3 head coaches? That's right, 6. 6 Super Bowl championships over the past 49 years with only 3 head coaches. How many Super Bowls have the Cleveland Browns won over the past 49 years with 18 different coaches? 0. What's the difference between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cleveland Browns? They both have professional football players. They both have the same amount of money they can spend because there's a salary cap. They both draw from the same pool of talent because they're drafting from college football players. The difference is the culture. It's the mindset. It's the Steeler way. The way the Steelers operate, the mindset that there's a purpose as to why they play football. They then measure how well their team does, and they optimize the way that culture responds with their players, their fan base, in their league to stay with stability because they have something that works. You know, Peter Drucker once said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And I'm a firm believer in that. All of the things on screen today have nothing to do with building a project management culture, and everything with how to strategically try to implement or improve project management. Just like the Cleveland Browns, the items on the screen are not going to help you win any Super Bowls within your organization. You need a new approach to help you be successful and win the PMO Super Bowl within your organization, and that's the PMO approach. Purpose, measure, optimize. Very simple, but the mindset is oftentimes as people, we overcomplicate what is simple in a way to try to justify whether it be bringing on consultants, giving ourselves an excuse for failure because we didn't go the full way, whatever it may be. A great example, when we're trying to diet, there are 100+ different books on the market of how to get in shape better. Each of them go into how you should eat, the types of food you should eat, when you should eat, how you should exercise, when you exercise, the frequency of exercise. And all of them claim to be the best. But if you strip away all of those books and talk to the authors about what is at the core, it comes down to 2 things. Eat healthy, exercise more. Eat healthy, exercise more. It's simple at the core, but yet as people, we've overcomplicated it to market and try to capitalize on the needs of individuals. And I think we've done that the same way in the project management space. Remember, only 7% of the organizations, based on the PMI Pulse of the Profession data, are champions today. So we need to understand how to go back to basics because those 7% are doing something right. And to me, when we look at them, we see that within them is a culture of project management, of purpose, measure, and optimize. So how do we know if we're being successful? Well, I think the first thing we can look at is how do we know when we're failing? And why are we failing? Rather than relying on myself and my experience, I want to put forth what Bill Dow has published. Hopefully all of you know Bill. He's certainly a leading figure in the PMO space, and he is author of many books. And I took this from one of his webinars, the PMO Lifecycle, Building, Running, and Shutting Down, Top Reasons Why PMOs Fail. So in that webinar, Bill gave these 7 reasons for why PMOs fail. Lack of stakeholder commitment. Well, that seems pretty obvious. I think that makes sense. Cookie cutter PMO leadership. The point here is not all PMOs can be the same. So if you have a PMO leader who came from organization A and moved into organization B and tries doing it the same way, well, then you've got an opportunity for a failure there. Accountability, authority, and responsibility. Well, that seems reasonable. If we don't have those clearly defined, then there's a great opportunity that we could fail. Number 4, the PMO police. Well, in this case, we're talking about governance, right? How much or how little is right for your organization? If you go too far left, too far right, you have a reason for failure. Strategic versus tactical. Again, in this situation, it's an example of which one is right. How do you know if you're too strategic, or how do you know if you're too tactical? If you don't have that really well defined, I think you're going to have yourselves an opportunity for failure, just as Bill has mentioned to us. Number 6, lack of analysis and metrics. Well, certainly if you're not measuring, how do you know how well you're doing? Well, I'm on board with Bill here. This makes sense. And then top reason number 7, poor PMO staffing. And I think this relates to not just the skill set of the project manager, but are they the right organizational fit for you? Do they have the soft skills that you need on your team? Do they have the industry knowledge perhaps that you need on your team? Many factors there, but ultimately we're looking at, do you have the right people? So what I want to talk about is how our PMO approach addresses each of these items that Bill has brought up as common reasons why PMOs fail. First, let's look at purpose. Peter Drucker, unless commitment is made, there are only promises and hopes, but no plans. That reminds me of a story about 15 years ago, early in my project management career, went in to talk to my boss, and he asked how one of my projects was going, and I said, well, I hope things are going well. And he looked at me and he said, Joe, lesson learned for you. Hope is not a plan. If you want to be successful, don't hope to be successful, plan to be successful. And it's no different with our PMO, right? PMO and having a purpose helps you understand the why you are doing this. Why does your PMO exist, right? There are several different PMO structures, right? Supportive, directive, controlling, enterprise, departmental, center of excellence. The list goes on. The reality it doesn't matter which one of those types or structures your PMO has. If you don't have a purpose, you won't be successful. So what I want us to do today as we move forward and talk through this is think to yourselves, within my own organization, have you defined the purpose of your PMO? Has the top-down levels of the organization bought into what that purpose is? Have you documented and gotten sign-off from your leadership as to what the purpose of your PMO is? Imagine if you were an IT PMO, which is so common across the world today, yet you were trying to operate as an enterprise PMO. I'm sure none of you have run into that situation. But when you do that, the immediate pushback from the folks on the other end, right? Folks in the sales department, marketing department, accounting department, legal department, et cetera, because they don't know you exist as an enterprise function. So it doesn't matter if you think you exist as an enterprise function. The company as a whole has not clearly articulated, defined, and agreed to your purpose. So let's look at Bill's list again, right? On the left are the 7 reasons that Bill had listed for why PMOs fail. You'll notice the top 5 have a check mark. On the right side is where purpose helps to alleviate the reason for failure that Bill mentioned. I just talked about getting buy-in from the top down, getting it documented, and getting a sign-off. If you get those, you then have built in an agreed-to stakeholder commitment. You're not going to have a cookie-cutter PMO because you're going to have built a charter or a similar document that's going to define exactly what your PMO is expected to do, their role within the organization, the objectives that they're going to set out to do, the activities they're going to do it with, and the resources they have at their disposal. So you're certainly not going to be cookie cutter because you've now just defined the purpose of your specific PMO. Accountability, authority, responsibility. Check mark. Boom. Within our charter, we're going to have in there RACI to be able to clearly define the roles and responsibilities of the PMO. PMO police, again, check mark. We're going to define how well we need to handle governance versus delivery, strategy versus tactical, etc., by aligning our PMO purpose to the expectations of our leadership team. So within Bill's 7 reasons why PMOs fail, by defining, documenting, agreeing, and getting approval on the purpose of your PMO, you immediately have a head start on trying to put off 5 of those 7 reasons for failure. Not a bad start. Another great question I always wonder is, why do organizations treat PMOs different than other functions? Think about it. How many times have you heard in your organization from somebody outside the PMO, what's the purpose of the PMO? I don't get it. You're just overhead to me. Well, are you an IT PMO? Are you an enterprise PMO? Process and auditing function? Training organization? Strategic entity? Delivery organization? The list goes on and on. Most folks have no idea what you are as a PMO. Think about it. Why aren't we the project management department? Every other functional organization within an entity is known as the department, right? The accounting department, legal department, human resources, sales, manufacturing, marketing. The list goes on. We know what each of those organizations do. There's a clear understanding that accounting is going to handle all of their processes. We never have anybody from IT say, I think I'm going to start doing the accounts payable process. I'm going to start doing the taxes. But we find very frequently somebody in the marketing department who wants to go run a project their way because they've run a project on a home improvement at their own house. Therefore, they would think they're a project manager. We need to have organizations understand who we are. Remember, we go back to the James Snyder story at the beginning and realize that PMI as an organization is only 50 years old. Formal project management as we know it is in its infancy. Organizations are trying to figure out how to use project management. Accounting, legal, human resources, sales, they've all been around forever. They have already matured. Organizations know how to use them, but we don't yet with project management. Think of the invoice payment process. Regardless of where a vendor is working, if they're a legal vendor, HR, sales, manufacturing, again, you name it, that vendor sends in accounts receivable or accounts payable, an invoice that we then have to pay as a company. Well, everybody in the organization knows that the invoice goes into accounting and the accounts payable team pays the invoice. There's a clearly documented process of how that happens, and the organization buys into it. But when we try to go run a project, why don't we have that same buy-in? And I think the answer, again, trying to keep it as simple as we can, is we haven't defined the purpose. Until everyone in the organization understands why we have a PMO, nobody knows why we have a PMO. There will always be a crack and an opportunity for somebody outside of our department, our function, our organization to think they can do it better because we haven't defined ourselves how we should be doing it within our organization. So think about that. First item of the PMO approach, define our purpose. Document the purpose. Build the purpose with our executive team and have them sign off. Get stakeholder buy-in with the purpose up front. Make sense? Sounds good to me. Number 2, measure. Another quote from Peter Drucker. What gets measured gets managed. Well, that's interesting. Well, we're a project management function, so we like managing things. We like managing projects, but perhaps what we're not great at is measuring things. In step 1 of our approach, we clearly set out defining a purpose. So with that, we know exactly what our expectations are. At the same time, that now gives us a clear understanding of what we should be measuring. Take, for instance, an enterprise PMO. If your purpose has been defined and signed off by the leadership team, that you're going to deliver strategic projects across the enterprise, that helps you understand what to measure. You're measuring those projects. Compare that if you were just an IT department and you're only going to work IT projects. You know that you're no need to measure the projects that are coming out of the sales team or the marketing team, right? Starting to set that purpose now gives us a roadmap of how to be able to measure. Again, we'll go back to Bill's list of the top 7 reasons why projects fail. And number 6, we're going to give that the check mark now. Right? Lack of analysis and metrics. Well, we're going to create our own process here of measuring the outcomes which align to the purpose. So even better yet, we're not just measuring to measure. Too often organizations spend time and energy to capture metrics that nobody does anything with. What we want to do is make sure that our metrics are aligned with our purpose, 1, to validate why we're doing what we're doing, but 2, to be able to measure to see how we're doing. We need to be able to convert the data that we're collecting into information so that we can take that information and make decisions. That's why Bill's item is analysis and metrics. It's not just metrics. It isn't just measuring. It's also measure and analyze to be able to make decisions. So once again, let's look at an organization. Typical organization and some of the things they measure. If we think about all hands meetings or company-wide meetings or the fiscal report that goes out, any information that hits Wall Street, right? There are a certain set of measures, metrics that we all are familiar with, we hear repeatedly. What are the sales numbers? What is the profit? What are our industry revenue term or inventory terms rather? What's our employee engagement? If you watch Shark Tank, they tell you all the time, you need to know your customer acquisition costs, right? All of those are known items. They're accepted within the organization. Everyone's comfortable talking about them. But when it comes to a PMO, we're a little bit in the dark with this. Are we going to use earned value? Does anybody even know what earned value is outside the people studying for the PMP? Well, if you're in federal contracting, you do. Defense contractors require earned value to be baked in to the way you're doing project management. But perhaps if you're at healthcare, they don't. Is there value within healthcare of using earned value metrics? Maybe. Depends on how you've defined your purpose. What is your why? On time and on budget. I think everybody gets those. I think those are probably the two most widely accepted metrics within the project management world. ROI, quality metrics, throughput, the number of projects we can work on. Does it matter if that number is low or high? How about hours trained? The key for this is we should be measuring what is aligned to our purpose. We need to understand that if we are doing projects that are putting in, for instance, maybe a CRM system, maybe an ERP or a warehouse improvement project, those projects are actually direct inputs to improving the numbers that are on the right side of the screen. So our project metrics are the delivery aspect, which help lead to revenue, profit, customer sat, employee engagement, etc. But why doesn't the organization at an all hands meeting talk about how many projects are in flight, what percent are on target, what's our throughput for the year, how are we behaving towards strategic goals? None of those are ever discussed. I think that can all tie back again to the purpose. And the organizations that are champions, they have a clear benefits realization model built into their organization. The only way they get there is if the organization understands from beginning to end, top to bottom, that projects are important, they're a way that we do work, and we have to be able to deliver, right? We're really good at measuring operations. We're not great at measuring projects. And that brings us to number 3, the O in our PMO approach, optimize. Daiichi Ono, the Toyota systems, right? Progress cannot be generated when we are satisfied with existing solutions. Just think about that. How many times have you either said or heard somebody say, that's the way we've always done it? To me, that's like nails on the chalkboard, right? That means we don't want to get better. There's no need to improve. We've just always done it that way. And that's the results we saw on that chart way back at the beginning of the deck, where from 2011 to 2018, we're flat. Organizations keep performing at the same levels of project management because that's the way we've always done it. We need to find the O, right? We need to be able to optimize what we're doing because we need to be able to show value. Back to Bill's list, top 7 reasons. Last one, number 7 on the left is now checked off, poor PMO staffing. If we think about this, we should be measuring what was aligned to our purpose, and through optimization, we should be improving our staff. So if we feel we have poor performing staff, then optimization will help to move those staff either into a trained and no longer poorly performing staff member or out of the organization, perhaps into a different role within the organization. But optimization is all about removing that's the way it's always been. It's also tied directly to measure and directly to purpose. We shouldn't be optimizing just for the sake of optimizing. We should be tying our optimism all the way back to our purpose. So what gets optimized? Probably a great question. Processes, our measurement system, our org alignment, our governance, our staffing, our training approach, everything that we've laid out within our purpose has the potential to be optimized. don't come into optimization thinking that it can only be our processes or only be our people. Everything should be on the table. Everything becomes an option to be improved. So I know the PMO approach seems pretty simple on paper, right? We're going to create a purpose, we're going to measure it, and then we're going to optimize, right? 3 things. Easy does it. Well, we know that that's not true. We know organizational roles like this are very complex and very challenging. But like any other department or function within an organization, the PMO must provide value, right? In order for us to do that, we have to know why we exist. If we don't know why we exist, then we will no longer exist, right? We know on average, the PMO life cycle, depending on the research you read, is anywhere from 2 to 5 years. How long do you think the accounting department's been around? How long has the HR department been around? I can certainly guarantee you they don't have an average lifespan of 2 to 5 years. Think about the future, right? The Pulse of the Profession 2018 gave us insight number 1 that's in the top left. The way that we deliver is changing. We're no longer going to be just a waterfall shop or just an agile shop. We are going to have many tools in our toolkit. It's not how you are doing it, it's why you're doing it. People get lost today in the debate of agile versus waterfall, and it really doesn't matter. Your executives don't care. What they care about is what you need to define in your purpose. Define your why. Then with measure, you can see, are you actually doing what you said you were going to be doing? Right, and the graphic there. Do you believe your organization fully understands the value of project management? In the 2018 PMI Pulse of the Profession, PMO directors responded only 56% yes. How is that possible? I can tell you why it's possible, because they haven't defined their purpose. They haven't defined their why. And since they haven't done that, they don't know how to measure. In order for us to drive that number up to the 90, the 95% that we certainly would give to, do you understand the value of why we have an accounting department? We need to be able to measure the value that we're providing back to the organization. Last on our list, of course, is the O. Find your O, find the way to optimize. You can't stay flat and expect to be successful. Results like the ones you see in the chart here are why the life cycle is 2 to 5 years for a PMO director. Stop thinking of that's the way it's always been and start finding a better way. You need to provide value or you're going to flatline. So that's the PMO approach. The question now is, does it actually work, right? Great discussion, Joe. Good talking points. But have you actually been able to do this? Well, of course we have. Now, I know there's a lot of information in this slide, and the slide will be available to you afterwards. The whole presentation, Hussein's going to make these available. So you have to be able to take time to go through this. So I'll hit the high points here. Using the PMO approach in a healthcare PMO, our directive was in the summary. We needed PMO process definition. We needed software implementation. They needed demand management, resource management, and they wanted to assess their staff. That's a huge engagement for any consulting organization to go into a large healthcare organization and be able to work through that. So our model, first we want to go in with a discovery to be able to understand the situation. Sure, we understood the ask, but why are they asking that? And what we found was probably not atypical. The healthcare provider had been through 3 PMO leaders over a 3-year period. They didn't have consistent leadership, right? How did they know how to behave? They just had constant turnover at the top. The PMO was within the IT department, reported to the CIO. And within that organization, there wasn't any governance, no executive steering committee, lacking resource management, demand management, financial management. Project managers weren't getting evaluated and trained properly, primarily because of the turnover at the top. They had a decent project management system, PPM system, but they weren't using it consistently, again, probably because of the turnover. And they did have a poorly defined project management methodology that had been modified repeatedly over the past few years. So the executive leadership team requested that we go in there and we look at all of this. So first we looked at purpose. What was the purpose of the PMO? When we looked at that, we found out that they never defined one. So the 3 PMO directors who failed over the past 3 years, some leaving on their own cause and others through the organization's choosing, was because nobody knew what they were doing to please the organization. So the first thing we did was work to define the actual purpose of the PMO. We had to document it. We had engaged the stakeholders. We documented the results and outcomes they were looking for. And this clearly was not easy. It was a very big challenge for us to do with the organization because nobody had ever done that with them before. But we did it. We worked through it. And they understood why we needed to do that. Once we had the purpose in place, we knew what to measure, right? We had already defined what we were trying to do, right? We didn't have a problem with the system not being used. It was they didn't know how to use it, why they were using it, what metrics were they trying to get out of it. So we went in there and built a measurement system that aligned with the purpose to ensure that we were demonstrating value back to the leadership team. And then finally, the optimize, right? When we go in, the PMO squad goes in, we send our squad in to work on an engagement. We want to ensure that there's processes in place to drive continuous improvement after we're gone, right? We want to teach them to fish, so to speak. This isn't about a long-term dependence on us. It's to help them create a culture and an organization that's going to be successful over time. So we had to recognize that you have to change at the right pace. And when the organization changes, the PMO must change with it. And that's part of optimize. First thing we started with was putting an evaluation system in place for them to understand the skill set and talent level that they had within their project management team. We then did a modification to their PPM system to ensure that they could get the type of metrics that they needed. All of that by building in additional processes for the resource management, demand management, financial management, et cetera, that would be under the guidance of a governance process. And the governance process aligned the PMO to the leadership team. So we built a purpose, we decided how to measure it, and with those measurements, we know how to way to optimize it. This wasn't just a one-time engagement for them. The PMO lives on forever. We have to make sure that we're building an approach that's sustainable, that provides value, and that is simple for all involved to understand and execute with. And for us, that's the PMO approach from the PMO squad. Hussein, that's what we had today. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share with everybody our approach of how we go in and help organizations build a PMO or to improve a PMO if they have an existing one. Do you have any questions on what we presented today?
Joe, firstly, thank you so much for being here. It was amazing. The whole PMO approach, purpose, measure, optimize, and definitely also love the whole concept about the importance of culture and the reason why purpose, finding out the purpose first, the reason why your PMO should exist, how that meshes in with culture directly. You can bring in as much strategy, as much tactics, as many frameworks, methodologies, whatever have you. But like you mentioned, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I love that quote. And that's just bang on, because I also firmly believe that if you have a PMO that needs to be included or fit in or developed or set up within an organization, and if the maturity of that PMO is too high or too low than the needs of its organization, if it's not fitting into the culture of the organization, then no matter how world class it is, it's not going to fly. So thank you so much for that, Joe. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And yes, absolutely. I've got a few questions for you right here. So with our first question, Joe, like you pointed out, PMOs come in various flavors and personalities, right? The IT PMO, the enterprise PMO, the departmental PMO, and the different types of models or frameworks that might exist as well. So what can PMO leaders do to quickly get past getting buy-in on the purpose of the PMO and then get treated just the same as other departments in the organization?
Well, that's a great question. And what we found is primarily sit down with your leadership team and understand what they're looking for, right? Too often, what we find when we go out into these organizations is there's lack of communication between what leaders want and what we deliver. So by sitting down, maybe in a series of one-off meetings, maybe over the course of a week or a month or so, and facilitating, we like to go in and facilitate those discussions so it's not an us versus them type of discussion. You work through, what do the leaders want to see? Do they want to be able to see delivery versus strategic? Do they want to understand that they want to have training across the board, right? We've had organizations where the PMO failed because the executive team wanted other leaders to be trained in project management and they never got that training. Well, the PMO didn't know that that was even an ask by the leadership team. So our way to try to quickly move through into the purpose is really just to sit down and get at it with the leadership team to bring both parties together and have the discussions that they haven't been having today.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense, Joe. Thanks for that. Joe, one final question for you. Once a PMO is set up, what are some of the things that you've seen are often the primary candidates to get optimized?
Well, that's another great question. What we find is that usually process is the first thing that gets optimized. The PMO is usually too aggressive in the amount of rigor that they want followed with their project process. And by going in and measuring how well, for instance, if we're asking for resource managers to approve in the PPM system every resource assignment, and we have a measurement system in place that shows us only 10% of those are getting approved, maybe there's a problem with our process. And by looking at those metrics, we have the opportunity to go in and optimize. So usually process is the first thing that we find. And second is the talent level. By putting in a proper evaluation process where we can measure project managers on all of the right criteria and not just are you on time and on budget, we find that organizations can really ramp up the skill level within their PMO. So our findings are process and talent are the first and second items that get optimized usually.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Joe. Really appreciate it. Thanks once again, Joe. And for everyone listening out there, I want to make sure that if you want to get in touch with Joe, go and check out his company, PMO Squad's website at www.thepmosquad.com. Joe also has an amazing podcast called the Project Management Office Hours podcast, which you can find on iTunes by just searching for Project Management Office Hours. And besides iTunes, you can also find it on iHeartRadio, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast platforms. And finally, if you're an experienced project manager who wants to give back, participate and contribute to the Veterans Project Management Mentoring Program, and you can learn more about how to get involved by going to the PMO Squad's website, which is again at www.thepmosquad.com. That was Joe for you, everyone. Joe, thanks once again for being a part of the summit.
Thank you, Hussein. I appreciate it and look forward to hearing from everybody.
Thanks, Joe. Bye-bye.